Good afternoon and welcome to my message of the day. I'm Warren, the rector here at St Columba's. On Sunday we had the reading from Mark's Gospel, chapter 6, which narrates the death of John the Baptist. The funny thing about it is that it comes right in the middle of another story. So chapter 6 begins with Jesus calling the 12 and sending them out on a missionary journey. Then they go out, and then the story switches to the death of John the Baptist. And then right at the end, it switches back to the 12 and their missionary journey, because they return from their endeavours and they regather around Jesus. Now, Mark could just as easily have just put the first half of chapter 6 as the story of Jesus sending out the 12 and them coming back to him, and then the last half of the chapter as the death of John the Baptist. But instead, what he does is plonk the death of John the Baptist right in the middle of the story. And doing that, it's a sort of a literary technique, if you like, to connect the death of John the Baptist to Jesus and his disciples and their mission. We get this elsewhere in the Gospel, that the disciples will be persecuted. In Mark chapter 13, Jesus explicitly says that his disciples will be persecuted, for instance. So picking up what Mark has done in chapter 6 in a literary fashion by plonking the story of the death of John the Baptist in the middle of the story of the mission of the 12, Jesus will say explicitly in Mark 13 that that's exactly what will happen. And Jesus says, pick up your cross and follow me. That means a lot of things, one of which is be warned, there might be trouble when you preach the good news. And John in this way is also a foreshadowing. His death is a foreshadowing of the death of Jesus. There are many parallels between the death of John and the death of Jesus. A couple that struck me when I was thinking about this for last Sunday was the way in which John and Jesus stand before two powerful men, Pilate and Herod. Both powerful. They're both impressed by their captive. Herod protects John the Baptist. Pilate doesn't want to execute, he wants to release Jesus. But they both have them killed in the end because of what they feel pressure from the crowd around them. In John's case, it's the dinner guests of Herod. In Pilate's case, it is the crowd outside. And Herod and Pilate are both manipulated in a way. They're both two powerful men, and they've got power and might have a sense of control, but actually they're swept up into events that they struggle to control, and actually, because of their weakness, just sweeps past them. So in this Mark chapter 6, Mark is, by putting the story of the death of John the Baptist squarely in the middle of this story of Jesus sending out the 12, is saying there's going to be trouble. And then we have that narrated throughout the Gospel and predicted by Jesus of his disciples. It's important for us to just think about this a bit. For instance, we're not told that the good news of Jesus will be accepted by all people. We're warned that it'll be exactly the opposite, that we shouldn't be surprised when, as disciples, we preach and live the good news, that there will be trouble. We shouldn't be surprised that the making of new disciples is not necessarily easy. But also, we shouldn't be surprised. We should also bear in mind, I should say, that the good news, there are people who want to hear it and who will hear it and who will join the community of Christian faith. So that's something to be gained from this reading of the death of John the Baptist and the links between that and the death of Jesus and the persecution of the disciples. Yes, there's going to be trouble, but also we see in the missionary journey of the disciples, there are people who want to hear the good news and will respond. The other And that's important in itself to remember. But just as a final reflection, I just want to think about how we might want to surrender to that truth about trouble coming when we preach the good news. In the Gospels, in the New Testament, one of the words used for like when Jesus is betrayed by Judas, when John the Baptist is arrested, the word, the Greek word, it means like you're handed over. So you can be betrayed, you can be arrested, you can be handed over. It means like you've been handed over into the hands of sinful men. This is the word that's used of Jesus often in his death. He's handed over. And it's the word that is used in Mark 13 when it talks about the persecution of the disciples. They'll be handed over to the authorities and persecuted. But interestingly, it's also a word that can be used for surrender. And that's part of the play on words with the death of Jesus. He's handed over, but also he surrenders himself. And I've been thinking about that. There's an element of that for us as we take in the fact of trouble that comes when we preach and live the good news. I'm not suggesting that we somehow have to have some heroic surrender to persecution or something. I'm not thinking that at all. More, I'm thinking we need to surrender to the truth of what we're told in that reading and in the Gospels, that where the good news goes, trouble will arise. We need to surrender to that rather than resist to the idea as though everyone should hear the good news, everyone should come to church or something. We accept that that's not the case. In fact, sometimes it's exactly the opposite. If we don't do that, if we don't surrender to that fact, then we might too easily succumb to disappointment or to resentment or anger or perhaps timidity. And these are not the dispositions of the disciples of Jesus. So part of the truth of the death of Jesus, the death of John the Baptist, and Jesus predicting the suffering of his own disciples, part of that truth is to accept it, to surrender to its truth, so that we can have or maintain our discipleship with hope in the power of the good news. Thanks for joining me. Bye-bye.